Welcome to week 3. Today we're going to talk about directing and managing project execution, why it's an important part of project performance. And we'll begin by discussing execution, why execution matters, and how PMI frames this concept across PMBOK 7. And we'll talk about the process groups, practice guide, and PMBOK 8. And then from there, we're going to take a look at what execution involves in practice, including directing project work, leading the team, coordinating communication, managing resources, supporting quality, sharing knowledge, and responding to change. And then we'll also compare how execution looks in predictive, adaptive, and hybrid environments before we close out. Why project execution matters? Well, project execution is the process of turning project plans into real work, performance, and results. Project execution matters at this point is where the project moves from planning into action. A project doesn't create value simply because the team did the planning, create a charter, schedule, did a cost estimate. Those planning artifacts are important, but they only become meaningful when we put them in practice, when we begin doing the work. Execution's the phase or ongoing activity where resources are applied and deliverables are created, team members coordinate their efforts, and stakeholders begin to see progress. And this is where project performance becomes visible. So this also where the project manager and the team needs to deal with real world conditions, such as changing priorities, communication challenges, resource limitations, risk responses, and quality concerns. So execution is the ongoing activity where the resources are used, deliverables are created, and team members coordinate their efforts. And this is where stakeholders begin to see progress. Up until now, we've just been planning. So now we're moving into execution. And this is also where project performance becomes visible and where the project team needs to deal with real project conditions, such as changing priorities, communication challenges, resource limitations, risk responses, and quality concerns. In other words, execution is where the project either begins to succeed or begins to struggle. Up until now, it's all been kumbaya and we got this great plan and everything's going to be wonderful. But I don't know if you've heard it, but some general someplace said the battle plans are great until the first bullet's fired, right? Then plans change. And this is where execution begins. So good execution helps transform ideas and plans into outcomes, and weak execution can prevent even a well-planned project from delivering its intended value. So no matter how good your planning is, if you don't execute well, you're going to have issues. The key takeaway is that project management is not only about planning the work, it's also about leading, coordinating, monitoring, and adapting the work as it's being performed. It's different than planning. In planning, we're kind of projecting into the future, and now we're dealing with daily things that happen. That's why project execution is important. It's the point where plans become performance and performance leads to results. How PMBOK 7 and 8 frame this project execution. PMI presents execution through related frameworks that emphasize the work, coordination, and performance. Project execution is important in both 7 and 8. 8's really an extension of 7. But each edition organizes the concept a little bit differently. And so it's helpful for us to know what that is as we're transitioning into the new standard, that the idea of execution remains important even when PMI changes the structure or the terminology. PMBOK 7, execution is treated through the domain called the project work performance domain, which includes areas such as project processes, communications and engagement, managing physical resources and new work, monitoring new work or emerging work and changes, and learning throughout the project. In PMBOK 8, execution becomes more explicit through the managed project execution and related processes. So manage quality assurance, manage project knowledge, and monitor control project performance. So the difference here is that PMBOK 8 kind of carried over, PMBOK 7 carried over what we had previously with this work performance domain. We used to call it, it's a perform project work was what it was called before PMBOK 7. And then PMBOK 7 changed it to project work performance domain. And now PMBOK 8 changes to manage project execution. So you can see the evolution there. Prior to PMBOK 8, it was mostly around executing the processes. And now it's more about leadership and management. You're still executing the processes, but we're taking a more leadership role and less of a transactional role, if you will. PMBOK 7 treats this through the project work and performance domain. Executions address, as I mentioned, through the project work performance domain. It's one of 8 project performance domains. The PMI describes these domains as interactive, interrelated, and interdependent areas of focus that work together to achieve desired outcomes. And we'll see in PMBOK 8, they explicitly call them areas of focus. The project work performance domain focuses on activities needed to carry out the work effectively. And so these are areas that we have that it's called project processes, balancing competing constraints, maintaining project team focus, maintaining project communication and engagement, managing physical resources, working with procurements, monitoring new work and changes, and learning throughout the project, and interactions with other performance domain and checking results. So that they got this kind of big view of how this works. So it's useful to know this because it shows that execution is not just a task completion. In PMBOK 7, it includes coordinating the work environment, supporting the team, managing resources, communicating with stakeholders, and adapting as the project moves forward. The work performance domain also supports delivery by establishing processes, managing physical resources, and managing procurements. A simple way to explain how PMBOK 7 treats project execution, it's a broader system activities that enables project work to succeed. The process group and the executing process group, the executing process group focuses on performing the work needed to produce the deliverables. So we have the managed project performance is under this process group. So in the practice, there's 3 documents. We have the practice guide, we have PMBOK 7 and PMBOK 8 that we're kind of relying on, the readings and things. So in the process groups, the practice guide, the executing process group is defined as the processes performed to complete the work defined in the project management plan to satisfy project requirements. So that's the traditional definition, if you will, of the executing process group. The guide explains that the process group involves coordinating resources, managing stakeholder engagement, and integrating and performing project activities in accordance with the project management plan. It also notes that the key benefit is that the work required to meet the requirements and objectives is performed as planned. And it's useful here because we need to understand that execution is, in this view, is very concrete. The executing process group includes, there's these processes that are involved in the group. It's called the direct and managed project work, which is the one we're talking about. Manage project knowledge, manage quality, acquire resources, develop the team, manage communications, implement risk, conduct procurements, and manage stakeholder engagement. So there's a bunch of processes that are included in this group. A simple way to look at this is that the practice guide presents execution as the organized set of processes used to carry out the work and create deliverables. So it's the same sort of view. This view is more transactional based, more we're planning to the plan, executing the plan, which is good. You'll see that PMBOK 8 takes a little different view of that. So we've looked at PMBOK 7, looked at PMBOK at the practice guide. So PMBOK 8, and it's called the executing focus area instead of a process group. PMBOK 8 makes execution more explicit through a dedicated focus area. In PMBOK 8, project execution is presented more directly through the managed project execution and some related processes within the broader performance domain structure. So they've kind of broadened the view here to take a more forward, more holistic, more value approach. It's sort of the modern way of looking at this thing. So PMBOK 8 has lists of managed project execution, managed quality assurance, manage project knowledge, monitor control project performance, and assets and implement changes. So there's fewer, they're more broader, but fewer. One notable one is that the procurement has been moved out to more of a corporate activity and less of a project management activity. So we have in planning, we have a strategy, a sourcing strategy as part of our procurement process, if you will, but the actual contracting and carrying out, like executing the procurement process is, in this view, is more of a corporate function and less of a project function. It's been a long time since I've been on a project that we actually went out and solicited contracts and went through all that. And nowadays we work with somebody from the legal department or we have a vendor group or something like that. It's a little bit different. So PMBOK 8 defines project execution as leading and performing work defined in the project management plan and implementing approved changes to meet the project objectives. And it explains that the main benefit is comprehensive management of project work and deliverables, which improves the likelihood of project success. Now we were kind of looking at, okay, we have this plan, we have these baselines, so it's plan to plan, let's stick to this and discourage change. The sort of the new view is we want to encourage change, but we want to implement the correct changes to it. So we want to make sure we want beneficial changes. So it's more of a value-driven view. The guide also makes execution practical by identifying outputs such as deliverables, work performance data, issue logs, change requests, and plan or document updates. We can see that execution is not just an activity, but it's a managed process that produces observable results and useful performance information. A simple way to explain how PMBOK 8 does this is that it makes execution easier to see because it names the work more explicitly and connects it directly to delivery, quality, knowledge. So a much smaller set, but more value-focused view here. So that's where we are with kind of the path where we are. Right now, the whole industry is in a change. We're moving more to this view. So we're going to look at the direct and managed project work process. Directing and managing project work is a core execution activity. It's how we turn approved plans into action and deliverables. This process is one of the clearest expressions of what project execution means in practice. In the process groups, the practice guide, it's one of these books here that's propping up my monitor. In the process groups, it's defined as the process of leading and performing the work defined in the project management plan and implementing approved changes to achieve the project's outcomes. The key benefit here is that overall management of project work and deliverables, which improves the probability of project success. So this is still a transactional view, but it's where we're at with PMBOK 7, which is what the course is based on. The guide also explains that the process involves executing planned project activities to complete the deliverables and accomplish objectives. Resources are allocated, their efficient use is managed, and approved changes are carried out as needed. During execution, work performance data are collected and communicated for analysis, helping the team to understand progress and feeding into later monitoring control activities. So this is a helpful point. Directing and managed project work is not just about assigning tasks. It includes coordinating technical work, managing organizational interfaces, addressing issues, implementing approved changes, and keeping the work aligned with the plan. It's sort of that baseline view that we're talking about. And the outputs listed in the practice guide enforce this idea. So we have deliverables, things like the work performance data. The work performance data is going to be used to measure our progress, which is important in execution. Change requests, this is that sort of, they call it emerging work now, change that happens, and plan and document updates. We should be updating the documents all the time. So in PMBOK 7, this fits within the broader project work performance domain. So we're looking at directing and managing project work here. So we're sort of a step down from the domain view. It's one of the 8 performance domains that we had. In PMBOK 8, we have the same idea, but it's called the executing focus area. In the particular process we're looking at is called manage project execution. So you can kind of see the relationship there. So key activities in project execution. Project execution requires coordination across several activities at the same time. One of the most important ideas to understand is that project execution is not simply the mechanical completion of assigned tasks. It's a broad management effort that involves leading a team, coordinating work, allocating resources, communicating with stakeholder, addressing issues, managing quality, and responding to changing conditions. During execution, the main thing that happens is the team performs the work to create project deliverables. At the same time, the project manager helps ensure that people understand the project's priorities, that what resources are available, communication needs to be ongoing, and the work remains aligned with the project's approved direction. This means that execution is both an operational and a managerial activity. So we're managing the project operations, doing the work, but we also have the management function of communicating with stakeholders and managing resources and things like that. It's also during execution that several important activities occur. Teams need to develop and manage collaboration. So that's part of executing is the team development. And we'll talk about that later in another class, another session. Communications are carried out. Knowledge is shared. Risk may require response actions. And procurement may be managed, or sourcing may be managed. And stakeholder engagement continues throughout the project. And then quality is something that we want to build into our project. So it's not something that we save to the end. It needs to be supported throughout the project itself. This is why project execution is often very complex, because there's many moving parts at the same time. And the project manager is not just watching what's happening. The project manager is helping to create conditions that allow the team and the work to happen effectively. So kind of a helpful way to explain this is that execution is where coordination becomes performance. And the project plan may describe what should happen, but execution is where the team needs to actually make it happen and make it happen in real time. So now we're not planning anymore, we're in a real-time situation. The role of the project manager during project execution. During execution, the project manager leads coordination, removes obstacles, and keeps the work aligned. The project manager plays a central role in execution because this is where plans need to be translated into coordinated action. The practice guide, the executing process group, is described as completing the work defined in the project plan, coordinating resources, managing stakeholder engagement, and integrating project activities. So we can see that while we have this sort of evolution, if you will, from the traditional to the more modern look, still pretty much the same kind of idea that we're going to be managing and coordinating that operational managerial function. More specifically, we have the direct and manage work process, which explains that the project manager, together with the project team, directs the performance of the planned activities, manages technical and organizational interfaces, reviews the impact of changes, and implements approved changes. It also involves collecting and communicating work performance data. So now we start to see that it's not a single activity, single person activity. It's a group activity with the project manager and the team. In practical terms, this role during execution is not just assigning tasks again. It includes keeping the work aligned, helping the team stay coordinated, resolving issues, facilitating communication, and making sure that approved changes are carried out appropriately. So the project manager helps convert the plan into actual progress. So now we're implementing it, now we're converting it. They're using sort of different language, but sort of the same thing. In PMBOK 7, the role starts to blend in both the management and leadership. And it explains that management activities include planning, coordinating, meeting, and monitoring work, while leadership activities focus on influencing, motivating, listening, enabling people. Both of these things are necessary to achieve the project outcomes, but it also notes that servant leadership includes removing obstacles and shielding the team from distractions so they can stay focused more on delivery. So now we see this from the traditional view of the project manager as sort of a task manager, operational manager, to a collaborator, team collaborator, and now we see them as a servant leader of the team, helping enable the team. And PMBOK 8 has the same idea, and they bring in oversight and coordination, which aligns to remove obstacles, maintain the team's focus. It also emphasizes that coordination might be centralized and distributed or hybrid, depending on the project context. So now we're starting to see that not only we have this servant leadership role, but it needs to apply similarly to different project contexts. In a simple way to explain this is that during execution, the project manager helps the team stay clear, connected, supported, and moving forward. The project manager is not there only to track work, but they're there to help create conditions that make project work successful. So now we're kind of moving in this modern role. It's been a long time since I've been on a project where I had direct reports that worked on the project. Usually they all work for somebody else. They're just assigned to the project, sort of a matrix setup or a modified project setup. But I had very little authority to tell people what to do. Most of them knew what they were supposed to do. I had very little authority to even assign tasks. Nowadays, what we do is people kind of volunteer to take on the task. You get together a team member, you're putting together your schedule, and you ask people to volunteer to who wants to do this task. If you have to, nobody volunteers, eventually you have to assign, but that helps promote ownership when you allow people to step up, and now they volunteered to do that, and it's just different than being assigned. Ownership's better, is always better, ownership of your work. But it's been a long time. So I've been in this facilitator, coordinator role for a while. In the military, they've got a role called quartermaster. And what their job is to provision, when they go out to the battlefield, you want to make sure that the soldiers have all they need. And then when they get back, they're going to be hungry. You got to make sure they got food, and so you're provisioning all of the stuff so that they can go out and fight or do their mission. Well, that's kind of the view that I have for a modern project manager, more of a provisioner or a quartermaster role that enables the team to be able to fulfill the vision of the project. And your job is to ensure that they have the tools, the technology, the training, the mindset. You're kind of responsible a little bit for morale and things like that, much like a traditional leadership role applied into modern project management. And you've see this evolution from one guide to the next. Well, what I'm talking about is an evolution that's taken place probably over the last 25 years or so, that we've seen this evolution from a commander type of project manager. In the early days, project team, everybody worked for the project manager. He signed your timesheet. You said it would take you 2 days to do something. If you didn't get it done in 2 days, you were held responsible. It's pretty much on you to do that. It's a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. That changed when jobs, especially knowledge jobs, individual contributors became more technical, and the job itself became more than just a project manager could explain. Some of the older projects that I worked on, I was the expert on the team as the project manager. And so they were there to help me instead of me there to help them. Sort of a different way to look at it. So leading a team and maintaining coordination is a big function. Project execution succeeds when the team stays aligned and connected and coordinated. A project can have a strong plan, but it can still struggle if the team's not working in a coordinated way. During execution, one of the project manager's most important responsibilities is helping the team stay aligned around priorities, responsibilities, and expectation. And we'll have a whole class session on team development, things like that, but it's a major part of the execution. Leading the team during execution involves more than just supervision, so I've talked about, includes clarifying goals, reinforcing accountability, supporting collaboration, addressing misunderstandings, and helping the team members stay focused on the work that matters most. Sometimes people working across functions or departments or even locations, so coordination doesn't just happen automatically. It needs to be supported intentionally. So while we're talking about coordination, that's my specialty. My dissertation was about coordination in projects. So one of the things I've learned about coordination is that there's explicit parts of it and there's implicit parts of it. So the implicit is the part that as you work together, you kind of get to know what you're supposed to do. It's some of the main things about coordination is that for effective coordination, the team members need to know why they're doing it, what their role in it is, sort of the bigger picture. And then they need to have the tools and materials in the right place at the right time to do their job. So it's sort of a explicit, got to have this and this, and then there's the implicit part of knowing what's going on. And so that's a big part of that communication, that mission to that. Maybe we'll dig into that a little bit. My concern at the time was, well, what projects were more successful? The ones that were more explicit in how they were coordinated, in other words, it was more directive, or ones that were more explicit. And what I found is that it takes both, and without one, the other doesn't work. This kind of promotes something that we'll talk about when we get to teams, but the modern view is to keep the teams together long term. And what I found, the longer the team's together, the more effective the implicit part was. In other words, the more you get to know each other and you get to know each other's capabilities and all of that, then it becomes more of a factor than the explicit part. But when a team is new, it's more of the explicit part. And then the implicit part kind of emerges from that. And it's an interesting thing to think about, but it's one of the reasons that nowadays we have this concept of what they call long-lived teams, keeping teams together for more than just a single project. The traditional view of projects was what I call a Hollywood view. And if you think about how they make a movie, they have a script, which you could call the script your scope, right? Then you have a director. The director's the project manager, and then you've got producers who are sponsors, all that project structure. But then when they get ready to do the movie, they hire a bunch of actors, they put together a bunch of people to do work, and everybody comes in and sort of does their thing. And when they're done with their part, they roll off and go do something else. And then when they get done filming, the whole film crew and actors are all gone. And then they go into post-production. It's a whole different team, new people. And then when they're done with that, it goes into distribution, which is a whole different team throughout the movie's life cycle. And they repeat that for every movie, right? And so every time they do one, they have to completely reassemble the team, and they're all new to each other. And there's always this sort of time period where the team takes to adjust to each other and start building this implicit sort of relationships with each other. Well, what we found is that the probably more effective things to do is keep the team together and then find projects for the team instead of finding teams for the project. So the movies, they find actors and people for the movie, but even nowadays they're more keeping an ensemble together and producing multiple, like those Avenger movies and all that. It's the same group of actors, but just different scripts, right? So they become more efficient at producing these sequels. That's why we see so many of them. But that's same thing is kind of moved over into how we do project management today when we talk about the teams. In that way, we can leverage that team camaraderie that people develop over time. We'll talk a little bit more about how that works. But one of the things that happens here is that communication in all these settings becomes essential. The teams need to know what's expected, what's changed, what issues exist, and how the work connects to the larger objectives. Back to my coordination example. When coordination is weak, we have duplication, delays, confusion, and rework that often follow. And when coordination is strong, the team's more likely to work efficiently and respond effectively to challenges. So we should understand that managing coordination it's not just about having meetings and status reports. That's the explicit part of it, and that's important. It involves building trust, encouraging timely information sharing, resolving friction, creating work environment where people can collaborate productively. Strong coordination helps transform individual effort into a collective performance. And that's where that long-lived teams, keeping the teams together, once we build that kind of collaborated environment, and to tear it down and rebuild it every project is inefficient use of our resources, right, our human resources. So a way to frame this slide here is that execution succeeds when people are not just busy, but when they're working together in a clear and connected way. And as a project manager who's responsible for coordinating your job is to communicate that way, the mission. Now we turn to stakeholders, communication and stakeholder engagement during execution. So planning, we put together a stakeholder register. We looked at, well, okay, we have all these stakeholders. What is their influence on the project and how will they be affected? How are we going to manage these people? So now when we get into execution, it's time to implement our stakeholder engagement plan. And so during execution, the stakeholder engagement it's not a side issue. It's a primary function of what we need to do. And it's essential to keeping the project moving in the right direction. If people don't receive the right information at the right time, misunderstandings increase coordination weakens and stakeholder support can quickly decline. I don't know if I mentioned here yet, but one of my main weaknesses as a young project manager was that as long as everything was going well, I just kept doing what I did. I didn't really communicate out much. Well, what happens is as humans, we have a tendency in the vacuum to think negative about the situation. Something's got to be wrong. My wife hadn't called me in an hour. Something's got to be wrong, something like that. Chances are it's probably totally the opposite. But without that flow of information, support can decline and erode the trust. So we want to make sure that we keep stakeholders engaged. And it's a connection that's clearly assigned in the PMI as what we should do. In the project work performance domain, it specifically includes project communication engagement, showing that effective work performance depends in part on how information is shared and how people remain connected to the project. In the process groups in the practice guide, that orange book, the execution process group explicitly includes managed communications and stakeholder engagement as two separate things, and they're core executing processes. It also explains that the executing process group involves coordinating resources, managing stakeholder engagement, and integrating and performing project activities according to the plan. Again, it's still a transactional view, but now we have it split up. And it's important because communication during execution is not just about sharing updates, it's about making sure the information is relevant, timely, and useful for different audiences. Our planning supports this by defining an approach where we engage stakeholders effectively. So we have our stakeholder engagement matrix that we create in planning that tells us that this person is high impact, high influence. So we want to manage them closely and we want to have face-to-face meetings with them, right? Or somebody has low impact, low influence, that maybe we just need to keep them aware. So we want to send some kind of weekly or monthly status report. So same information, different medium to do that. So stakeholder engagement matters, and that's why we develop it in the plan. And the plan needs to be reviewed and updated throughout the project. It's not something we do during initiation, and it's not a one and done thing. Risk management falls in the same category. But most of the documents that we create in planning, we want to go back and update them as we go through execution. So here we're talking about the communications plan that we have, stakeholder engagement plan. PMBOK 8 shows this, again, makes it more explicit, and it has the executing focus area where we're talking about. This includes coordinating resources. It's called managing stakeholder engagement and performing project activities. While the stakeholder domain maps execution to manage stakeholder engagement and manage communication. So I think I just said that. So we got this still split thing, but it's manage instead of perform. And it's a little more explicit way of looking at it. A simple way to kind of explain this is during execution, communication keeps people informed and stakeholder engagement keeps people committed. And both of these are necessary to sustain project performance. So what about resources? Managing resources and supporting work during the work execution. Project execution depends on having the right resources available at the right time. It depends heavily on resource availability and resource coordination. Even a well-planned project can fall behind if the team doesn't have the people or the equipment, information, funding, materials that are needed to perform the work. And that's why managing resources is an important part of execution. During execution, the project manager helps to ensure that resources are assigned appropriately, used efficiently, and adjusted when conditions change. This includes human resources, but also includes technology, facilities, vendor support, procurement items, and other assets that enable work to move forward. Resource management is not about assigning people to tasks. It's about timing, availability, capability, workload, and resolving gaps that appear. So this is where the stewardship principle that we talked about, be a steward, being a steward of the resources, a steward, making sure that all these resources, that we are good stewards of their use, and that we're making sure they're used efficiently and effectively, and we're not wasting resources or taking advantage of resources. All this is important because project environments are rarely static. Team members may be reassigned, materials may be delayed, costs may shift, priorities change, which may affect availability. And as the project execution unfolds, the project manager needs to monitor these constraints and help the team while staying aligned with the project objectives. Notice they say objectives and not plan here. So subtle difference. The students should understand that resource management during execution is closely tied to team performance. So we should understand that it's how we manage resources. It kind of seems obvious to state that we need to how we manage resources is closely tied to performance, but some people don't always make that connection. When resources are aligned well, the team can stay productive and focused. And when the resources are poorly managed, the project experiences delays, frustration, rework, and quality outcomes. A way to frame this is that resources make execution possible, but resource coordination makes execution effective. I'm sure you've probably all been out on the road and you see a construction crew and they're all kind of leaning on their shovels. That's probably because some resources they're waiting on cement or somebody to be there. That work wasn't coordinated well, right? So it's that kind of thing. You can generate a lot of overhead and waste by not effectively being a good steward of the resources that you have. So what about quality? Managing quality, strong execution depends on building quality into the work and capturing knowledge as the project moves forward. The way we implement quality here is the total quality management approach, where quality is built into the design of a product, and it's not something that we inspect in later. Back in the early manufacturing days, they would just stamp out as many products as they could, and they would just wait at the end, and there'd be a big pile of stuff that needed to be scrapped or reworked, and there'd be a pile of stuff that they could sell or go through. Well, that's changed to where there was a slogan back in the 80s, they would call it quality is free. Essentially what that means is that you take the time and apply the resources to build quality into your product. You might have to charge more for it, but if customers are happier with it because the quality is better, then quality pays for itself. And it's the same sort of concept here in the project, that not only do we have the quality of the product that we're working on, we want to make sure that it's built in, but we also have the quality of our project management work. How well are we coordinating it? How well is the team working? How well are we performing on the execution as a group there? So we want to design a plan and select resources in such a way that we've got good quality built into that. Take the time to do that, not just throw bodies at something. You've heard that concept where it's just got to hire people. It doesn't always work that way. The practice guide explains that manage project knowledge, which is the other part of the concept. So strong execution depends on building quality into the work and capturing knowledge when the project moves forward. Managing quality during execution is important. I talked about that. And in the process groups, they both reinforce this concept. And again, it's an early concept, so it's sort of carries through all of this. The practice guide explains that project management is concerned both with existing knowledge and creating new knowledge. And it also emphasizes that knowledge is not just about documents and lessons learned at the end. It includes both explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. The tacit knowledge that the team has or the organizational culture has. And effective knowledge sharing depends on trust, interaction, and integration across people and context. The practice guide explains that managed quality involves implementing the planned and systematic activities in the quality management plan so that process is effective, so stakeholder expectations are met, and efficiency and effectiveness improve. And it also notes that quality is the work of everybody, although roles may define project approach. So quality is the responsibility of everybody on the project as we're going through and executing. PMBOK 7, all this aligns with PMBOK 7, which lists improved quality through continuous learning and process improvement as an outcome of the project work performance domain. It also notes that project work performance supports efficient, effective planning, delivery, and stakeholder engagement again. And in PMBOK 8, it explicitly includes both managed quality assurance and we have a new process here called managed project knowledge. And so what we're seeing now, if you've kind of noticed this sort of the thing on quality and knowledge is it's all about learning. Well, we can design it in, but we want to continuously improve. So we have a very good project plan, or we have a very good product that we're working on. Well, that's great, but there's always room for improvement. So how do we learn what we're doing? This is more the traditional view when we had a more transactional view of project management, less value and leadership driven. We were more, well, we had this plan, we complete all the tasks on the plan, all the measurements look good, so we're on board. Well, now but we might have missed that value proposition. We might have missed out on the vision. So now it's like, okay, what's the project vision? That's our mission, to implement that vision. Okay, we've done a real good job here with that. How do we improve? How do we do that? And we do that through learning. So integrating learning. And this learning idea, I got to give credit to the Agile project movement, the Agile movement in general, that they saw early on that a big problem we had with project management that eventually led to the Agile movement was that there was not much feedback going on. There was not much learning going on. We met together with the stakeholders, put a plan together, they signed off on it, and then we did it, and there was not much talking in between until we delivered what we're doing. And then when we got there, he passed away this last year, but I used to like to listen to Scott Adams, the Delbert guy. He had a podcast that he did. He explained politics, but he was explaining that you have the conservatives and the liberals, they're all watching the same screen, but they see two different movies, right? When we got to the end and we delivered the product, sometimes we both had two different products, and it created a big gap there that we figured out that, okay, we need to learn more about what our stakeholders expect. And so we started seeing things like daily stand-ups and frequent demonstrations and early continuous deployment. All of those things have now kind of moved into what we call would be a hybrid environment in project management. So again, it's all part of this improving quality and knowledge in the project. So part of execution is monitoring the project work and managing change. There's a new kind of way of thinking about change as in a project during execution called emerging work or emerging requirements. In other words, it's not something different. It's something that comes out of the work that we're doing. It's not change for change's sake. Now, there is external factors that may do that, but internally during execution, we're looking at it more of an emerging feature of the project itself. Project execution stays effective when teams monitor emerging conditions and manage change deliberately. Change was something that prior to the modern era, we sort of reacted to. Oh, we have to do this. Now we're more intentional about change. We try to learn this learning that we had before, the knowledge that we're gaining. What does that tell us we need to do to either improve the project or improve our performance, and improve the product or improve our performance? And how do we do that? And then we change instead of something happening like, oh, we're behind budget, so now we have to go and do a bunch of schedule crashing and stuff like that. It's more intentional, more disciplined in how we do it. And sometimes we think of it again in that older way as a disruption. Change was a disruption. It's always been a part of project work, but it's not whether that change will occur. It's how we're going to be prepared to recognize it, how we're going to be prepared to handle it. The process group, the practice guide, includes reviewing the impact of all project changes and implementing approved changes so the plan can be achieved. It also generates outputs such as change requests, work performance data, and project management plan updates. This will show that the monitoring work and managing work is closely connected. Monitoring work and implementing change are closely connected. We have the same logic in PMBOK 7, where the performance domains are described as interacting systems rather than isolated areas, and the team performs the project work from information from delivery, measurement, uncertainty, stakeholders, and planning. All of these things information from all those places, and they signal a need for adaptation or a need for handling emerging work. PMBOK 8 also has this tied to monitoring and controlling in the executing focus area, where it connects project execution and monitor and control project performance, reinforcing that work and evaluation occur together rather than a separate sequence. a way to explain this is that during execution, the team must keep one eye on the work being done and one eye on what's going on around the work. Good project managers don't ignore change. They don't react impulsively. They manage change thoughtfully so the project can remain aligned with its objectives. So now we've got in project execution, we got this dual thing where we got all this work. It goes back to the sort of the blending of the management role and the leadership role. This forward-looking part of this is the leadership in the stewardship role that we have. Then we have project execution in predictive and hybrid projects. Some of these, like in an adaptive project, we're kind of planning in short increments, right? And then following through on that, but we're still executing. We're just doing it on much shorter increments. And then we also have projects that work on different intervals. Oftentimes, as I mentioned last time, is they blend those together and we have a project that has a planning interval. So they're going to plan for a period of time. In Scrum, it's like 2 weeks. We plan for 2 weeks. Just so happens that their delivery interval is 2 weeks. So it's they're synchronized. But in other methodologies, adaptive methodologies, they'll plan for 10 to 12 weeks or maybe more, maybe 6 months. And then they have intervals where they get together and, okay, we've done all this work. Let's look and see if it's what the stakeholders want. So there's that coordination that goes in there with the stakeholders to learn and get knowledge about what we're doing. And then, okay, let's go and build some more. And we're still working off of that 6-month plan, but we're doing incremental chunks of the work as we go through and verifying it instead of waiting till the end. And then there's other methodologies that are like every day. We get together in the morning, we have a list of stuff we're going to do. These are the top 5 things. We're going to pull that off. We're going to work on only those things. We're going to limit our work. It's called a WIP limit, work in process. We're only going to do that work until we're done with it. And then we'll go back to the board and pull some more work off. So they're doing it like really quickly. And all of that depends on the work, how that gets done. But the point that I'm trying to make is that all of those methodologies involve an execution feature or a time period. So while we're in the incremental ones, we have the planning that we're doing. So we plan for our planning increment, but then we're executing in intervals through that project. And so we have all these things that we've been talking about: coordination, the team resources, the knowledge that we need to do, change needs to be adapted. All of those things, those are skills that the project manager needs. And one of my fundamental objectives when I was asked to put together the project MBA in project management program, which has been now 16 years ago when the MBA has been around, is that to be an effective project leader or project manager in the modern environment, you need to have skills that you know how to apply in all different modalities of how projects are delivered. So you need to have skills that apply to the traditional predictive, those same set of skills with some additional ones that are kind of explicit to the adaptive methodologies. Learn those, learn the ones that for hybrid, and we can apply. You learn how to apply those in all places. Sort of one of the metaphors, or I guess analogies I like to make, is that if you had a sore throat, you wouldn't go to a foot doctor. What do they call those things? Anyway, yeah, you wouldn't go to them. You would want, because the only way that maybe you go to a doctor, the only way he know how to treat things was the broken bones. Like, if you're going to treat a sore throat, put a cast on your throat, something like that. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous thinking about it, but you want to go to somebody that has a broad range of skill set so that they know how to apply the right protocol for what you're trying to do or for what illness that you have in a medical situation, right? And so that's kind of our view. And it's really important during the execution process how that goes. Most people that I've seen come through projects that I work on are really good at planning. You know, we all have to plan stuff every day. We plan how do we get up? What are we going to do for our day? We all have some, but actually going out and doing work is a whole different thing. And making sure the work gets done, it's a whole different skill. And good project managers can do both, but executions is real important. So now we're talking about applying this in different environments. And that's kind of the idea here, is that we've got execution that what we're studying for traditional will apply to all of these. And there are things that we've learned, like I was talking about the frequent product demos. Those are things we can bring back into more predictive approaches and strengthen those. I think maybe I mentioned this last time, y'all let me know if I did, but about the study, the chaos study. There's a company reporting, one of these data gathering companies, they provide data industry, and they all through the 90s and up into 2000, and they still do, but they used to produce this chaos report. And they always would say that, well, projects, we had a miserable success rate. You know, they would say like 70% of all projects failed. And out of the 30% that succeeded, 20% of those were challenged. Means that maybe there was something about them that made them difficult. And only like 10% were actually successful. Now, they were measuring success in the traditional on time, on budget, that sort of thing. But then we brought in the adaptive approach, what we call agile approach, where we had more of this learning during this, more this focus on execution, less on planning. And it got about a overall 15% bump in success rate. So now we went from 70% fail to 55% fail. So we have like a 45% success rate. And out of those, maybe 15% of those were challenged. And so we saw a big jump, but they were still applying them in individual worlds. And now what we're seeing is we're seeing them come together through tailoring, project tailoring, where we're designing projects for context and we're managing projects for context, execution for context. And the latest report I saw was we're up around somewhere around a 35%, no, we're around 35%, 65% success rate. That's what I'm trying to say, 35% failure. So we're seeing not quite great, but we're still moving much better than we were. And I haven't been on a project in a long time that was considered a failure by managing the project execution this way and taking into account and keeping stakeholders involved. If the stakeholders are involved in your project, if the team's got right morale and you're paying attention to what needs to adapt, when you get to the end, the gap in expectations is going to be much smaller. Then usually you can handle that gap in expectations with your stakeholders through maybe an additional work that needs to be done, but you can get there. In predictive execution, we've talked about this a lot so far, but predictive execution usually follows a structured plan developed earlier in the project. So we have scope, schedule, and cost are defined in upfront detail, and the team works to carry out the baseline orderly way. And this means that execution emphasizes sequence, control, careful management of deliverables. Changes still occur, but they're usually handled in a more formal review and a more reactive review. My experience with this is when the cost of change is really high, then you need to be more deliberate about getting approval from stakeholders to apply that cost. One of the things that I've also noticed, and it really doesn't matter with how a project's executed, but even with these incremental methods, as the more and more product gets delivered, the more expensive changes are. I did a paper, a literature review. It's been a while, but it was part of my coursework. And it was on what is the cost of a change in a software development project. And because that's what most of my career, I managed or led software teams. And what I discovered through the reading was that it was like 250 times more expensive to fix a defect that's made it out than it was to spend the time to plan and do it up front, right? And so as these software projects especially get more, you deliver more and more iPhone functionality, the more expensive it is to change the iPhone. I think we're seeing that now with the SpaceX. It's been 4 or 5 months since they did their last test, when they were doing them like every month for a while. So they were learning and rapidly changing, but now they got this platform and they're having to modify it and change it, and it's taking them more time to do that. So it's another thing to think about during execution when it comes to change. It gets more expensive as we go through. We try to mitigate some of that through more in these adaptive approaches through more continuous adjustment. So adaptation execution depends on iteration, feedback, and continuous adjustment. And in an adaptive project, execution is more flexible and iterative than in a predictive environment. Work's completed in short cycles, and the team uses frequent feedback and to refine priorities and improve results. Planning, execution, and monitoring often happen close together. So in Scrum, the Scrum methodology or framework, the way they define it is that you have a 2-week interval. They call it a sprint. And the first day of that 2-week interval is half of the day, 4 hours, is planning. And what you're doing is you're just going and looking at the product backlog and saying, okay, what's the high priority things? The product management or somebody will say, this is what we need to do. You pull those off and you figure out how much of that, you're trying to plan how much of that you can do in the next 2 weeks. And then whatever you can do, you commit to, that goes on your team backlog, and that's what you work on for the next 2 weeks. And then on the last day, the second half of the day is 4 hours of demo time. Demonstrate what you've done to the stakeholders. They get to comment on it. Then you have a team retrospective, which is learning time. And then you roll right in the next day into planning, and you do the cycle over every 2 weeks. And what they're essentially doing is they're doing a predictive, people that are like purists, agile purists, will probably say differently, tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. But essentially what they're doing is they're doing little mini planning, executing, delivery every 2 weeks. They're taking what we've done, what might in a predictive model project spread over a year, they're doing it in little short increments. And at the end of each one of those increments, after you've demoed it, the idea is the customer says, or the stakeholder says, I like that. Let's go with it. They roll it into production and they have usable software at the end. That's the goal, or usable product at the end. And most of the adaptive methodologies implement some variation of that. The bigger the project is, the bigger the teams are, the more coordination it is, and the more it looks like a traditional hybrid project with all this adaptive stuff underneath it. But it's a way of executing, it's just a different method of executing it. And again, my purpose for this program is that when people come out of this, they have a broad understanding of how these apply in all different environments. And that way, when you get into your workplace, or if you're currently doing it, you can use these skills or this knowledge you're gaining right away. And that's the idea. Execution in hybrid projects. This requires integrating structured planning with adaptive delivery. And you can see the Scrum thing the planning is pretty structured. The biggest difference is they don't do a lot of the details up front. You do it at the planning meeting. Mostly you'll know, okay, I want this so that I can do something with it. And then the team has to decide, well, how do we make that? How do we implement that? And that's what they're doing. Where in the traditional, we would probably have all those done up front. We would call it a business requirements document, and with use cases and all kinds of stuff, details. The problem with that is by the time the documentation is done, stakeholder expectations have changed. And so then there's some rework in the documentation. So that goes back to the quality of our planning and building that quality in. And rework is a bad thing because it's expensive. So the key takeaways that we have this morning is that project execution is turning plans into action. That a project doesn't create value simply because it has a charter and a schedule or a budget. Value begins to emerge when the team starts performing the work. Project managers coordinate people and work. During project execution, the project manager helps align tasks, resources, communication, and priorities so the team can move forward effectively. Third, communication and resources support performance. Teams need timely information, stakeholder support, and the right resources in place if execution is going to stay productive and aligned. And fourth is quality, knowledge, and change must be managed. A strong execution means building quality into the work and into the processes themselves, the deliverables that we have, like the scope statement, all of those project documents, and learning as the project progresses and responding to change in a controlled way. And then finally, execution varies across predictive, adaptive, and hybrid projects. The form may change depending on the approach, but the need for leadership, coordination, and value delivery remains the same. That's my point across all these. So remember that project execution is the point where the project begins to prove itself. Planning provides direction. Execution, though, is where the team performs the work, coordinates resource, communicates with stakeholders, and manages quality and response to change. It moves the project forward to value. The total goal is to create value. So that is the end of the show.